Imagine making a promise so sacred, so deeply rooted in honor, that breaking it is simply not an option. This was the reality for Sergeant Naomi Brooks, a soldier who vowed to escort her best friend, Corporal Devin Hayes, home after a devastating loss on the battlefield. But what should have been a dignified and seamless process took an unexpected turn when airline policies threatened to separate her from Devin's flag-draped casket. What happened next, however, would leave an entire airport terminal speechless. In this story of courage, unity, and respect, strangers took a stand when it mattered most, transforming a moment of injustice into an unforgettable act of collective honor. This isn't just a story about one soldier's determination. It's about the power of community, the unexpected heroes among us, and the ways in which humanity reveals itself in moments of moral crisis. But what was the twist that left everyone stunned? How did a simple flight become a powerful statement about respect, duty, and the sacrifices made by those who serve? Stick with me as we unravel the emotional journey that took place that day and discover how strangers can come together to honor a promise that was almost broken. Sergeant Naomi Brooks stood at the edge of the runway, the dry Arizona heat beating down on her as the military transport plane taxied to a halt. Her uniform clung to her skin, damp with sweat, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the rear cargo door, which began to lower with a mechanical hum, revealing the flag-draped casket inside. Her heart clenched. This was the moment she had dreaded. 12 years in the military had taken Naomi across the globe, through deployments that tested every fiber of her being. She had faced intense firefights, the mental strain of being away from family, and the emotional toll of seeing fellow soldiers fall. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for this. Inside that casket was Corporal Devin Hayes, her best friend. Devin wasn't just a fellow soldier. He was the brother she never had, her constant through the trials of war. They had enlisted around the same time, gone through basic training together, and had been deployed on countless missions side by side. Devin was the one who made her laugh when the weight of the world became too heavy, who shared stories about his hometown in Kansas and his dreams of opening a diner when he got out of the service. They had always talked about the future, but war had rewritten those plans. Naomi's mind drifted back to that fateful day overseas, their last mission together. It was supposed to be a routine patrol, one they had done dozens of times before. The air was thick with tension, but they both knew the drill. Yet, in war, the difference between routine and catastrophe is often just a heartbeat. A sudden explosion shattered the calm. An IED hidden beneath the dirt road detonated, sending debris into the air. Naomi remembered the deafening ring in her ears, the dust that clouded her vision, and the frantic moments that followed. When she finally found Devin, he was barely conscious, blood staining his uniform. "Naomi," he had whispered, struggling to breathe. "I'm here, Devin. I've got you," she choked out, trying to staunch the bleeding. But there was nothing she could do. As she cradled him in her arms, his eyes locked onto hers, filled with pain but also a strange calm. He gave her one last smile, that same goofy grin he always had, before the light faded from his eyes. Naomi had carried him back herself through enemy fire, refusing to let anyone else bear the weight of his body. It was her way of honoring him, of not letting him go alone. At the military base, before Devin's body was loaded onto the transport plane to return home, Naomi met his mother, Mrs. Hayes, via a video call arranged by the military chaplain. The image of the grieving mother, her face etched with pain, clutching a photograph of Devin as a child, would be forever burned into Naomi's memory. "Please," Mrs. Hayes had whispered, her voice trembling, "promise me. Promise me he won't be alone on his way home." Naomi swallowed hard, tears welling in her eyes. "I promise. I'll bring him home myself." And now, standing at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport, Naomi intended to keep that promise no matter what. The military had done its part. The transport had brought Devin stateside, but the final leg of the journey, from Phoenix to Wichita, would be on a commercial airline. Naomi had been given all the necessary paperwork, military clearance, and escort credentials. Everything was in order. Or so she thought. She slung her duffel bag over her shoulder, feeling the weight of responsibility settle in her chest. The terminal was bustling, families heading on vacations, business travelers scrolling through their phones, and announcements echoing overhead. Naomi walked through it all, laser-focused on gate B-17, where her flight was scheduled to depart in 90 minutes. Her eyes darted to the tarmac through the large windows. She could see the cargo hold of the aircraft open, but Devin's casket wasn't there yet. That was normal, she told herself. The escort process had protocols, and normally it went smoothly. But her gut felt uneasy. Approaching the gate, Naomi stood in front of the counter, waiting for the gate agent to notice her. The woman behind the desk was deep in conversation with a co-worker, laughing at something on her phone. Naomi cleared her throat. No response. She tried again, this time louder. The gate agent sighed and finally glanced up. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone impatient. Naomi straightened her posture. "I'm Sergeant Naomi Brooks. I'm escorting Corporal Devin Hayes to Wichita. I just need to confirm the procedure once we land." She handed over the stack of military paperwork. The gate agent flipped through the documents without much interest, typing a few things into her computer. Her brow furrowed, and she let out another sigh, this one heavier, laced with irritation. "That's actually going to be a problem," the agent said, barely making eye contact. Naomi's stomach dropped. "What kind of problem?" The woman didn't seem fazed by the growing tension. "Your layover in Dallas. Our policy doesn't allow escorts to stay with the casket during certain layovers. You'll be on a separate connecting flight to Wichita." Naomi blinked, her pulse racing. "I'm sorry, what? I'm his escort. I can't be separated from him." The gate agent shrugged. "It's policy. You'll meet the casket in Wichita." Naomi's jaw clenched. She could feel the heat rising in her face, a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "No. That's not acceptable. I have military clearance. I promised his mother he wouldn't be alone." The agent's expression didn't change. "I don't make the rules. You'll have to take it up with a supervisor." Naomi inhaled sharply, trying to keep her composure. "Then get me a supervisor." The gate agent, clearly annoyed, grabbed her radio and mumbled something into it. Naomi stepped back, her mind racing. She had faced danger in combat, but this bureaucratic wall felt just as insurmountable. She wasn't about to break her promise over some corporate policy. As she stood there, trying to figure out her next move, a voice cut through the noise. "Excuse me, miss," an older man said, standing up from a nearby seat. Naomi turned. The man was in his 70s, wearing a cap adorned with Vietnam veteran insignia. His face was lined with age and experience, his eyes sharp and filled with something Naomi recognized. A soldier's pride. "What's the problem here?" he asked, his voice gravelly but strong. Before Naomi could answer, the gate agent spoke. "Sir, this is a private matter." But the veteran ignored her. His focus was on Naomi. "You're escorting a fallen soldier?" "Yes, sir," Naomi replied, her voice thick with emotion. "And they won't let you stay with him?" She shook her head. "No, sir." A muscle twitched in the old man's jaw. He turned to the gate agent. "That's unacceptable." Before the agent could respond, another voice chimed in. A woman clutching a folded American flag sat nearby, her hands trembling as she stood. "My husband died in Iraq," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. A soldier escorted him home. Every step of the way. I can't imagine what it would have been like if he'd been left alone. Naomi felt a lump in her throat. The weight of the moment was growing, not just for her but for everyone who was now watching. The terminal, once filled with the typical travel chatter, was growing quieter. Passengers began listening in, realizing something significant was happening. A murmur spread through the crowd. "She's military. Why aren't they letting her do her job?" someone asked. "That's disgusting," another voice added. Naomi could feel the momentum shifting. Strangers were rallying around her, standing up for what was right. But she still wasn't sure if it would be enough. The growing murmur in the terminal wasn't just noise, it was a rising wave of solidarity. Naomi stood there, feeling the weight of 100 eyes now focused on the unfolding scene. But rather than feeling exposed or alone, she felt something unexpected, a shared sense of purpose. Complete strangers were beginning to understand the gravity of her mission. The Vietnam veteran stepped forward, his face set with a quiet authority only earned through experience. He turned once more to the gate agent. "You're telling me," he said, voice low but heavy with meaning, "that this young woman, who's fought for this country, is being told she can't stay with her fallen comrade because of a policy?" The gate agent shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught off guard by the crowd's growing disapproval. "Sir, it's not my decision. It's airline protocol." "Protocol?" the veteran repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "You think protocol matters more than honoring a soldier's final journey home?" The agent opened her mouth but faltered under the veteran's unwavering stare. The terminal had grown nearly silent now. The only sounds the occasional airport announcement in the distance and the faint hum of travelers standing still, waiting to see how this would unfold. The widow holding the folded flag stepped closer to Naomi, her eyes glassy with tears. "When they brought my husband home," she began, her voice trembling, "the escort stayed with him the entire way. It meant everything to me, knowing he wasn't alone on that last trip. It was the only comfort I had." Naomi felt her throat tighten. These were strangers, but their pain mirrored her own. They understood what it meant, the depth of this promise. "It doesn't—" As if the floodgates had opened, more voices joined in. "This is wrong," a businessman in a sharp suit called out. He stepped forward, pulling out his boarding pass. "I fly every week. I've seen airlines roll out red carpets for celebrities and politicians. You're telling me they can't make an exception here? For a soldier?" Applause broke out among the waiting passengers, a ripple of approval, of solidarity. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make the gate agent glance nervously toward her radio. Naomi could feel the energy shifting. What had started as a solitary fight was turning into something bigger. Strangers, people with no personal stake, were taking a stand. The gate agent, clearly overwhelmed, clicked her radio. "Supervisor needed at gate B17, she muttered, trying to keep her composure. Naomi's heart raced, but before she could even consider what might come next, the airport intercom crackled to life. "This is your captain speaking. Sergeant Brooks, please come to the podium." The terminal froze in a collective moment of stillness. Naomi's heart pounded in her chest as she made her way to the podium. The gate agent stepped aside. Confusion and unease painted across her face. From the jet bridge, a tall man in his late 50s emerged, his pilot uniform crisp, his silver hair combed neatly beneath his cap. There was something in his eyes that stopped Naomi. A deep, unwavering empathy. "Sergeant Brooks," he said, extending his hand. Naomi shook it, her grip strong despite the emotion welling up inside her. "Captain." "I heard everything," the captain continued, his voice calm but resolute. He turned to the gate agent, his tone shifting into something firmer, more authoritative. "This soldier is staying with her comrade." The gate agent's mouth opened, clearly preparing to protest. "Captain, the policy—" "I'm aware of the policy," he interrupted. "I also know that exceptions have been made before, and I have the authority to make one now." The silence that followed was deafening. The gate agent hesitated. "I'll need approval from corporate." "You have it," the captain said, cutting her off. "I've already spoken to them." Naomi felt the tension in her chest finally ease, a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The crowd broke into applause, louder now, echoing through the terminal. The widow wiped away tears, clutching her folded flag tighter. The Vietnam veteran crossed his arms, a satisfied nod on his face. Even the businessman gave Naomi a supportive clap on the shoulder. The captain turned back to Naomi. "You'll stay with him, Sergeant, every step of the way." Naomi swallowed hard, emotion threatening to spill over. "Thank you, sir." The captain offered a small smile before returning to the jet bridge. The gate agent, now visibly flustered, began typing furiously on her keyboard. "You're all set," she muttered, sliding Naomi's boarding pass back toward her. But Naomi noticed something. The gate agent's lingering bitterness. She glanced at the pass. "Seat 34F, the very last row. Naomi's jaw tensed. She knew what this was. A final act of petty defiance. An attempt to diminish her, to make her journey uncomfortable despite the captain's orders. But before Naomi could respond, the businessman stepped forward, placing his own boarding pass on the counter. "She'll take my seat," he said firmly. "First class, 3A. The gate agent hesitated, but under the eyes of the crowd, she had no choice. She scanned his pass and reissued Naomi's ticket. Naomi's eyes widened. "You don't have to do this." "I do," the businessman replied. "Get him home." Her throat tightened. "Thank you." With her new boarding pass in hand, Naomi made her way to the jet bridge, her duffel slung over her shoulder. But as she boarded the plane, she realized the journey wasn't over. Not yet. As Naomi stepped onto the plane, the weight of the moment settled in. She hadn't expected any of this. Not the confrontation, not the public outpouring of support, and certainly not the simple, quiet acts of defiance and kindness from complete strangers. She made her way toward the first-class section, still stunned by the businessman's generous gesture. But something caught her attention. Something unusual. The captain stood at the front of the plane, not in the cockpit but at the head of the cabin, microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice echoed through the intercom, "before we take off, I want to acknowledge someone very special on this flight." Naomi froze, her heart thudding. "This is Sergeant Naomi Brooks," he continued, "and she's escorting Corporal Devin Hayes home. She made a promise, to his family, to his mother, that he wouldn't make this journey alone, and today, she's keeping that promise." A hush fell over the plane, followed by the soft rustle of movement as passengers turned in their seats to look at her. Then, slowly at first, the sound of clapping filled the cabin, building in volume, becoming louder, stronger. The Vietnam veteran stood first, clapping with fierce pride. The widow, seated in coach, wiped tears from her eyes as she joined in. One by one, passengers placed their hands over their hearts or raised them in applause. Naomi swallowed hard, overwhelmed. She wasn't used to this, to recognition, to being seen in this way. Her job had always been about duty, about honor, not about attention. But in this moment, she felt something deeper, a profound sense of unity. These strangers who had no personal connection to Devin or his family were standing together in recognition of what this moment meant. The captain lowered the microphone, giving Naomi a nod before returning to the cockpit. As the plane took off, Naomi sat in her seat, staring out the window as the city of Phoenix faded beneath them. Her hand instinctively clutched the duffel bag resting on her lap, the same one she'd carried through countless deployments. It felt heavier now, filled not just with gear but with memories, promises, and the weight of a friendship that had ended too soon. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Ma'am?" A flight attendant knelt beside her, holding a small tray. Naomi turned, surprised. "Yes?" "Yes." The attendant offered a gentle smile. "The captain wanted you to have this." On the tray sat a neatly folded napkin, and stop it, a pair of pilot's wings, silver and gleaming. "He said he doesn't usually give these out," the attendant continued, "but he thinks you've earned them more than anyone." Naomi felt her throat tighten. She picked up the wings, running her fingers over the smooth metal before clenching them tightly in her hand. "Thank you," she whispered. The attendant gave her a small nod before returning to the galley. Naomi sat there, the wings in her palm, tears welling in her eyes. This journey had been more than a simple escort. It had become a testament to promises kept, to the strength of community, and to the power of strangers standing together in moments that truly mattered. But most importantly, it had been a reminder that even in a world filled with policies, procedures, and bureaucracy, humanity still shined through. She would get Devin home, not just because she promised, but because now an entire plane full of people was standing with her. The flight to Wichita was filled with moments of reflection. As Naomi sat in her first-class seat, staring out the window at the clouds passing by, the enormity of the journey sank in. The events at the terminal, the confrontation, the crowd rallying behind her, the captain's unwavering support, had transformed this escort mission into something far greater than she had anticipated. But her focus remained on the promise she made. Every breath she took reminded her of Devin's mother, of that heart-wrenching video call, and of the hollow pain in Mrs. Hayes's eyes when she had asked Naomi to bring her son home. Naomi had made that promise with all her heart, and now, after what felt like an insurmountable battle, she was almost there. She traced her fingers over the smooth metal of the pilot's wings still clutched in her palm. It was more than a token. It was a symbol of the unity and respect that had surfaced in the most unexpected way. These wings weren't just for her. They were for Devin, for his family, and for every soldier who never made it back home. The soft chime of the intercom broke her thoughts. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Wichita. We'll be on the ground shortly." Naomi's heart began to race. This was it, the final leg of the journey. As the plane touched down and rolled along the tarmac, Naomi felt a heaviness in her chest. She wasn't sure if it was relief, grief, or the overwhelming mix of emotions that had been building since the moment she left the combat zone. The plane came to a complete stop, and the familiar ding of seatbelt signs turning off echoed through the cabin. But no one stood up. Instead, there was an unspoken understanding. Everyone waited, allowing Naomi to exit first. A flight attendant approached her quietly. "Sergeant Brooks, the captain has arranged for you to disembark before the other passengers." Naomi stood, gathering her duffel and straightening her uniform. Her legs felt heavy as she moved toward the jet bridge. As she stepped into the terminal, the atmosphere shifted. This wasn't like any ordinary arrival. Just beyond the security area, she spotted them. Devin's family. His mother stood at the front, clutching a tissue in one hand, the other hand trembling as she gripped a folded photograph of Devin. His father stood beside her, his jaw set tightly, trying to hold back tears. Devin's younger sister, no more than 16, clung to their mother's arm, her face pale and tear-streaked. Naomi swallowed hard and adjusted her uniform, standing tall despite the storm of emotions inside her. Every step felt heavy but purposeful. This was what she had promised. This was the final part of Devin's journey. As she approached the family, Mrs. Hayes stepped forward, her face breaking into a sob. Naomi halted, straightened her shoulders, and offered a crisp military salute. "Ma'am," Naomi began, her voice quivering but steady, "I've brought your son home." Mrs. Hayes broke down, her legs giving out beneath her. Naomi stepped forward and caught her, the two women embracing as sobs racked through both of them. It was raw, heartbreaking, and yet deeply necessary, a release of all the pain they had been carrying. "You kept your promise," Mrs. Hayes whispered between tears. Naomi's own tears streamed freely now. "I would never leave him alone." The surrounding crowd, airport staff, travelers who had paused their own journeys, stood in respectful silence. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Others stood with hands over their hearts. After a long moment, Naomi stepped back, giving Devin's family space. Military personnel from the local base were waiting to complete the honors. Naomi watched as they carefully unloaded Devin's flag-draped casket from the cargo hold, a military honor guard standing at attention. The scene was solemn. A trumpet player stood nearby, raising his instrument to his lips. The haunting notes of taps filled the air, echoing through the terminal and into the hearts of everyone present. Naomi stood at attention, tears still streaming down her face as she held a sharp salute until the final note faded away. When the honor guard finished, one of the officers approached Naomi. "Sergeant Brooks, thank you for your service and your dedication," he said, his voice low with respect. "You did something extraordinary." Naomi shook her head. "I just kept a promise." The events of that day didn't end at the Wichita terminal. A fellow passenger on the flight, moved by what he had witnessed, had filmed the entire interaction. The video captured the gate confrontation, the crowd's unified stand, the pilot's announcement, and the emotional reunion at the end. Within hours of landing, the video spread across social media, gaining millions of views. Comments poured in from all over the world, veterans, families of fallen soldiers, and civilians alike, all expressing their gratitude, admiration, and heartbreak. This is what honor looks like. Naomi Brooks reminded us all of what truly matters: respect, dignity, and humanity. As a mother who lost her son in Afghanistan, I'm in tears. Thank you, Sergeant Brooks. Media outlets picked up the story, highlighting not just Naomi's dedication, but the collective power of strangers who stood together for what was right. In a time where divisions seemed more common than unity, Naomi's story served as a beacon of hope, a reminder that when people choose compassion over policy, profound things can happen. Naomi was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. She received messages from fellow soldiers, Gold Star families, and even students who had been moved by her story. One letter stood out, a handwritten note from a mother whose son was currently deployed overseas. Because of you, I know that if my son ever doesn't make it home, someone like you will be there. Thank you. Naomi never sought recognition. For her, it had always been about Devin, about keeping her promise, and about upholding the code that bound soldiers together. But the journey had taught her something deeper. Honor wasn't about medals, ceremonies, or grand gestures. It was about the quiet moments, the commitments made in whispers, the battles fought in silence, and the choices made when no one was watching. It was about the Vietnam veteran who stood up when no one else did, about the widow who found the strength to share her pain to help someone else, about the businessman who gave up his seat without expecting anything in return, and about a captain who used his authority to stand on the side of compassion. In a world that often feels indifferent, these moments of humanity mattered. They were the threads that wove people together, across generations, experiences, and backgrounds. Naomi often thought about that day, not just the pain but the beauty that emerged from it. She kept the pilot's wings in a small wooden box, along with Devin's photo, letters from his family, and the folded flag from his casket. And sometimes, late at night, she would take them out, run her fingers over the smooth metal, and remember. Not just the loss, but the promise. Months after Devin's funeral, Naomi returned to Wichita to visit his family. It wasn't an official military visit, this time it was personal. Mrs. Hayes greeted her at the door, tears welling in her eyes, but mixed now with a softer, more peaceful expression. "I want to show you something," she said, leading Naomi to Devin's old room. There, on the wall, was a framed display. Inside were the pilot's wings Naomi had given Mrs. Hayes, Devin's service medals, and a simple plaque that read, "In honor of those who serve, and those who never leave their side." Naomi stood silently, feeling the enormity of the moment. "You didn't just bring Devin home," Mrs. Hayes whispered. "You brought him honor, and you reminded us all what that really means." Naomi nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'll carry him with me always," she said softly. Mrs. Hayes reached out and took Naomi's hand. "And so will we." This story isn't just about Naomi, Devin, or even the soldiers who serve. It's about all of us. It's about the choices we make in moments that matter. Will we stand up when we see something wrong? Will we use our voices, our actions, and our compassion to make a difference? Because sometimes it only takes one person to start a ripple that becomes a wave. And as Naomi Brooks taught us all, promises matter, honor endures, and humanity shines brightest when we choose kindness over indifference. So, the next time you see someone fighting a quiet battle, remember, you could be the voice that tips the scales. You could be the one who stands when it counts. Because in the end, we all have the power to bring someone home.